Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jerry Miller. I'm with All Things ADAS, and I just want to welcome two guests today. We've got Spike, James Rodas, and we've got Brunno Moretti. And I want to welcome you both to the podcast this morning. And why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of information about yourselves? Spike, why don't you go ahead and start?
Hey, everyone. Again, Spike, James Rodas. Coming into my 39th year in the collision industry and been doing calibrations since roughly 2012-ish. Enjoy joining these with Jerry and just chatting a little bit about ADAS.
Excellent, excellent. Brunno, what about yourself?
Yeah, Brunno Moretti. So I run the ADAS business unit for a company called Burke Porter. I have not been in the industry for 39 years. I've been for about a year and a half now. And before that, I spent most of my career in the automotive tier 1 and OEM. So I worked for General Motors for about 10 years and worked in a supply base for about 5 more, designing and architecting all of the ADAS systems that you see on the roads today. So that's how I got here now.
And you're out of Michigan then?
That's correct. Yeah. I'm in the Metro Detroit area.
Okay. Now, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I've never heard of the company Burke Porter Company before. Tell me a little bit about them and your association with the ADAS side of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, it's Burke Porter has been around for 7 decades now, right? And the way it got started was the OEMs needed a way to test the vehicles, when they just get finished being assembled, right? And the founder, his name was Burke Porter. It wasn't Burke and Porter. It's just the guy's first and last name, right? So the company name is just the guy's first and last name. So Burke Porter came up with this treadmill that the vehicle can go in at the end of the line for the assembly plant. And, then you're able to test the vehicle without having to take it out on the road and, do a test drive, which adds all sorts of problems of logistics and liability and whatnot, right? So that's how the company got started, and as, from the 70 years that has been around, has been evolving, and in doing all of this kind of test and measurement that happens either at the end of line for OEMs, which is one of the biggest areas of business that we do in. And then we also in the R&D department of all of these OEMs, whenever they're doing dynos, whenever they're doing noise and vibration testing. So all of those things takes rigs and equipment to make it happen. And that's what Burke Porter does. So what my team specifically does, my business unit, is we focus on the aftermarket, and we have this, we leverage the automation that happens at the end of line for OEMs, which again, vehicles have to go extremely fast. These stations do a lot more than just calibrate ADAS. They do several other things, align, do the headlamp alignment as well. So we leverage that automation and the hands-free, human-free kind of work that we do at the end of the line and brought it into, to the aftermarket. For the past 4 years, we've been working on the equipment and, having a partnership with a company that we went to market with. And then now, just more recently, we have opened it up to the rest of the market. So that's kind of where we're at today.
I'm trying to envision this. So the vehicle comes off the assembly line and it's now, let's call it finished as far as the assembly line. So then does it go into to another machine that you have that the vehicle goes into? I'm envisioning kind of like a dyno type thing.
Yeah.
And then is somebody manning that, or is it all automated?
So normally, yeah. And look, I'll tell you from even before I joined the company, right, where I spent a lot of time in the assembly plants for General Motors, and the vehicle rolls off the line, just being put together. One of the operators drives it into the first station. First station is going to align the wheels, is going to calibrate the ADAS, whatever ADAS it is, it's going to, so there's, radar flat plates sometimes, there's the camera targets. They're also going to do headlamp alignment and a few other checks that, that they're making sure that everything was built correctly, communication is done correctly in the bus, right, the vehicle bus. Once that's done and successful, it goes on to another station. That's the station where you refer to more of a dyno, but it's really called a dynamic vehicle tester, because if with the dyno, you have to tie it down, there's all sorts of precautions, right? We don't have that kind of time at the end of line, so you have to, it's a system that the company developed that the vehicle drives in, right, with somebody or operator driving it in, and automatically it gets put into place, or safety obstacles come into place automatically as well. And then you're able to drive the vehicle up to 80 miles an hour to test transmission, engine. And there's hundreds of tests that are happening while the vehicle is being driven in the, in this DVT, the dynamic vehicle tester. And that's where, again, OEMs are making sure that the vehicles not only are getting calibrated, aligned, but that there isn't anything that could be going wrong with the vehicle right off the line. So they perform all of these tests and measure several different things that ensure quality at the end of the day. And that's across every single OEM.
So do you just hook up, as I call it, the Obi-Wan Kenobi port? You just plug into that then with your equipment and
the
go?
OBD2. Yeah, you plug it into both in both stations, and look, it varies by OEM, right? Some have multiple stations, 2, 3. Others try to have less, right? So it all depends. But yeah, in all of these stations, you're plugging it in. The vehicle, all of the modules in the vehicle are still unlocked, meaning you're still able to communicate on a manufacturing kind of a setting, and you're able to for example, put ADAS calibration values into the modules, right? So they're not locked yet. So all of that happens through the OBD. It's software that we create ourselves for a lot of the times that then communicates with the vehicle, communicates with the machine, and then runs all the tests and then puts a nice bow on it, close it, and then say the vehicle's ready or pass or fail.
So when it comes to calibrations, you guys are doing this in the whole car in like minutes, correct? At the factory level?
It's less, right? When you're looking at, that first station that I described, you're looking at that being about 1.5 minutes, and that means everything, right? So you're talking maybe a minute or less, that you're doing calibrations. Of course, you're trying to do as much as you can simultaneously, right? But you're going things all under a minute.
And so that's the first station. What about the second station?
Second station, I'm not going to try to give you a time. It's not long. It's longer, but it's not long because, again, you're getting the vehicle up to speed. You're going through all the gears, right? If it's a nice vehicle, and you're running testing, then you do a hard brake, right? So there's all sorts of things that happen that, again, it's being measured and tested, but at the end of the day, it's really only minutes as well.
And I actually got to see that at the assembly plant down in Kansas City for Ford. Mm-hmm. And now I know that was your company, Brunno.
Yeah. So we're about 1 out of every 2 vehicles in the world go through our equipment. So we have over 50% market share worldwide. Much bigger here in the U.S., of course, being a U.S. company. But we literally every OEM that produces in Europe.
You mentioned that you do just about all the car lines, at least in the United States. How, for example, in the United States, how many plants are you in the United States?
It's hard to say. I mean, in the U.S., we have much bigger market share, right? So I just have to say probably the vast majority of them.
Okay.
In the U.S. would be ours. And then, of course, we have a little bit less in Europe because we have a European competitor there. Same with China, right? Having a Chinese competitor and so forth, right? But in the U.S., it's the biggest market share.
So who developed? Well, I got a ton of questions. So backing up here because I don't want to get all one-sided here. But so basically, Brunno, you're doing this from the manufacturer side, and Spike, you're doing this from the customer side, so to speak, once they have an issue, and now it's got to get corrected in the field, so to speak.
Yep.
So you're both in the same world, except Brunno, you're doing it on a new vehicle. Spike, you're doing it on a vehicle that in most cases had a problem or it was in a collision of some sort, and now we're trying to recalibrate a vehicle.
And it's amazing to me because we do it differently than they do it. Like Chryslers are very dynamic on our side. Stellantis, sorry, Chrysler. Mm-hmm. But in your world, Brunno, that's not the case.
That's correct. Yeah. All OEMs do they do ADAS calibrations on the plant because the car is brand new. They don't know, the camera doesn't know where vehicle is or where home is, right? So they need to figure that out, right? The North American OEMs, right, for the after collision or service, they do dynamic calibrations, meaning you just drive the vehicle around and until you hit certain number of targets for the camera and the radar to see, then it calibrates, right? It's not as precise as a static calibration, but they think it's good enough, right? But and Jerry, just to kind of put a little bit of a pin. Like, yes, our company does all of this in the end of line, but remember, my whole team has equipment for the aftermarket. So I live, the calibrations, post collision or service oriented as well. So we do both, actually. Of course, majority of our work is done at the end of line, but we have been growing this business on the aftermarket side. And Spike got a chance to see the equipment in action. So, highly automated and everything. So yeah, we live both sides, and we're trying to bring as much as we can from the end of line to the aftermarket, because I think the aftermarket has been an afterthought, pun intended, right? Like people and companies are just not spending that much time. When you look and read calibrating procedures from OEMs, they're extremely manual, right? They're tape measures and plumb bobs and other things in order to get exactly where it needs it. And I know why they do it, right? They do it because they don't want to have to put the onus of getting equipment to anybody that's doing repairing a vehicle, right? I get it. But at the same time, we just saw such a large opportunity for us to add automation and remove human error that we think that it makes a ton of sense to add technology to this side of the business on the aftermarket. So that's kind of where we're at.
And I did get to go down just this week. I went down to San Antonio and seen their machine in operation. They have two different ones. Both are very cool. One is probably a lot more similar to the end of the OEM line, Brunno.
Mm-hmm.
That was the bigger one. And then they have a smaller one that they've thought of a lot of things I don't think anybody else has thought of yet, which was very cool to see. And, we were looking to see how it lines up with how we operate, because as Brunno, me and Brunno were on stage together at SEMA, and
that's right.
Seen how smart he was. And then afterwards we start chatting, and I'm like, all right, I like talking to this guy. But, as he knows, we're sticklers for the way we do it. And that system seems to line up very well with what we do.
Well, I'm curious too. So, you open up another box for me, Brunno, on you're on both sides of the fence now. So in reality, at some point, you two are in competition with each other to a certain degree. But let me go back to the equipment once. First of all, why isn't the factory doing it themselves? They make the vehicle, they design the vehicle, they decide what equipment they want dealerships to use to work on vehicles, whether it's from alignment equipment or any of the equipment. And then all of a sudden it comes to calibrating the vehicle, and then they have a different company doing it, and it's not the manufacturer. I'm just curious why.
You're talking about specifically on the equipment side of things, right?
Well, the equipment or even the ADAS side of it, as far as calibrating it. It just seems odd that the manufacturer doesn't do that themselves at the factory.
Yeah, look, I mean, when you think about let's say the Suburban or the Tahoe from Chevy, right? They're made only in one plant in Arlington, Texas, right? So, but they're sold all around the country. So for them to try to get vehicles into a production setting to do calibration is just not feasible, right? Logistically and otherwise, because they're producing vehicles in 3 shifts, right? So, and all those pieces of equipment are being used at a high rate. So then it's the question is, okay, the OEM is not producing the equipment itself to go do it. It's because of that previous comment of they do not want to force dealers or otherwise, collision shops or service shops to have to buy equipment to do something, right? So that's why they have a very manual process that, quote unquote, anybody should be able to do it, right? Mm-hmm. Now we know that's not the case, and it takes a lot of skill. Read some of these Toyota ones are 79 pages, right? It's like, so they kind of say, look, I'm giving you the tools, or not the tools exactly, right? But I'm giving you the ways and methods to do a calibration. You guys have to figure out the rest, and that's kind of how they treat the aftermarket, and it's for better or for worse, right? I mean, that's just what all OEMs do. It's not just one or the other, but when it comes to service, they have a very hands-off approach. We're going to design something. You guys will adhere by it. We're also going to let companies come in and fill this void that you just described, Jerry, that's like there is no piece of equipment. So we're also going to let them do it, right? We're going to let the market kind of be the market and, come up with solutions that are doing exactly what we want. Because whenever people say like, oh, we're OEM compliant, okay? I think the only people that are truly OEM compliant is Spike's company, right? Because they actually follow everything letter to the law, where if you look at using our equipment, for example, we consider it OEM enhanced, right? Because we're putting the target exactly where the OEM says, We're just now using the method that they told us to get there, right? But at the end of the day, if you do a side-to-side comparison, it's exactly the same with 5 millimeter precision. So it's whenever people say that, but they're like, oh, they're using some other tool. It's like, well, technically you're not OEM, not certified, but OEM compliant. Right? Yeah. So that's kind of where we're super careful with how we use our words, just because, when you use a piece of equipment, then you're technically not OEM compliant. But that's where we kind of came up with this OEM enhanced, right? We're trying to enhance the method of doing the calibration by having automation in it, if that makes sense.
What's the failure rate at the factory when you're off the assembly line, when you go to calibrate a vehicle? How often does it not pass?
It's very often it does pass, right? Meaning it's over 99%. And that's because, again, think about this, right? In an assembly plant, you're either making one model or variations of one model, maybe sometimes a couple of models, right? So you can really control things to a certain extent that Spike and I cannot in the aftermarket, right? We have every single make and model, all different model years from 2015 all the way to 2026, right? So we don't have that luxury that the assembly plant does of preparing things in a way that the lighting is exactly the same for that one camera and that one vehicle that sees things in a certain way and is always seen the same way. So it's very well designed to pass every time, right? And unless, of course, when you're first launching a vehicle, which I've done a few of those in my career, you always have problems at the launch just because software is, still churning and changing. Once you're a steady state, the failure rate's extremely low.
And I'm going to guess if it is a failure, it's not because Fred didn't put the camera on right. It's down the assembly line. It's probably more of an electronics issue, is my guess.
Yeah. I mean, you have, the modules that come with issues with software or hardware that can cause failures, and that's where a lot of this originates, but it's not because of the process or how the station itself is performing it. You're right. So,
Spike, from your world, and Brunno, I guess, in the aftermarket, or after, let's say, once the vehicle's in the customer's hands and now the customer's has been in an accident, that's where Spike, your business comes into play. And Brunno, it sounds like that's the market you're getting into as well. So, Brunno, you're using a completely different set of pieces of equipment to do that calibration versus Spike at this case. Spike, you're using the OEM equipment, and Brunno, you're using the Super Whoop OEM equipment, I guess. So trying to accomplish the same thing. Well, that's kind of interesting. So do you see that this is going to end up being an overlap at some point where, Brunno, I'm assuming that you guys are going to also try to get into where you're generating the actual equipment and looking to sell that kind of equipment to Spike, for example, to do his business?
No, and Jerry, that's what we're doing right now, right? So we have equipment that, again, Spike got to see that we sell to the aftermarket. And I think if you look at, the way that Spike and his team, they do calibrations and you compare it to ours, I think if you say side by side, you're going to see the same quality, right? I think the only difference is the time and speed of the operational efficiency to get it done.
Okay.
It's a very, common knowledge that once you start automating things with machinery, things are just going to go faster and you're able to do more vehicles. I think, and Spike and I have talked about this, that the ADAS penetration into the car park is massive, right? 94% of new vehicles have it. 2029 is going to be 100% with the FMVSS 127. So it is something that now is going to start going from, I occasionally have to do this, to every single vehicle has to do it. And companies like Spikes are going to have some level of automation or something in order to keep up with the demand. Because I think that the demand is just going to grow so much because of that penetration of ADAS in the car park, that then every single job is going to have an ADAS. It's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. So that's where I think that where we're coming in with that kind of piece of equipment and the automation, there is a future state of our industry in the aftermarket that you're going to need something like that in order to keep up with demand.
Wow.
Yeah, and you have to feel quite a bit better about somebody who's done it at the end of the line, right? Coming up with the system to work, because you guys have been there, done that. You guys know the tolerances better than anybody, because you might have wrote the program for those tolerances. So
yeah.
it's not reverse engineered in my mind. It is with true OEM data that you guys are working with.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Spike, we get to see things ahead of time, right? Because again, we're at the end of line and before launch and all of those things, right? But surprisingly, it's not every single OEM, but surprisingly, it's not necessarily reverse engineering, but what they do in the factory, like for example, the North American OEMs, they don't have something in the aftermarket, right? Or some of the European and Asian OEMs, they do have something, but they're different than the end of line. So I think the OEMs, and shouldn't come to surprise anybody, they're very siloed, right? The engineering team works on their own things, the manufacturing team, and then the service team, right? They're all kind of siloed, and you don't get a lot of cross pollination of communication. So, but yeah, no, we do get to see it, and we do get to design it. So we do leverage a lot of that, and it makes it a lot easier, and we can get to market faster with it because again, we've seen a lot of it before. But it's surprising too that whenever we see the service OEM procedures and we compare it to what's in the manufacturing, it's different. You know what I mean? So it's interesting, but
A head scratcher.
yeah.
So are the cars getting too complicated?
I don't think so. I'm a technology nerd. I like having my vehicle has Super Cruise, and every time I'm on the highway, that thing is on, right? So for me, that's fantastic. And I think OEMs are trying to catch up a lot with what Tesla has been doing, right? And I think the over-the-air updates is going to really catch on with all of the other OEMs. They all do it, but not to the level of Tesla, for example. I think Rivian and Lucid are close, but they're going to get more complex. I'll tell you that right now. Even if you think they're too complicated, they're not going to stop because we think that, right?
Right.
And you're going to start looking at these new architectures, and Tesla is already one of them, but they're going to domain or zonal architectures, right? So they have one or two big compute systems into the vehicle that do everything. So ADAS, infotainment is all going to be in one module, right? So shops, calibration shops, collision shops, they're all going to have to get really smart on that technology. And that's one of the things I always preach is that you can make this a profit center. You can, become more than just a collision and really work on that more technical side of things. You're going to be better prepared for the future than somebody that's not, right? Because vehicles are getting very, very complicated.
So how do you see this working in the legal world when it comes to calibration? I suspect that no matter what equipment you're using, you're going to have to be able to prove out in the end that the vehicle was calibrated properly. And so I don't see that being any different between either one of your two worlds, I'm assuming.
100%. Spike, you can speak to this too, but for example, with ours, we designed the system and the workflow, right, to capture pictures, to capture values measured with, high precision lasers, right? And then have all of that in a report at the end, because from a legal perspective, right, we're the last ones that touch the vehicle and then of course give it back to the shop, let's say. And if there is an accident and they say, it's because it wasn't calibrated properly, well, I have a report right here in my hand with pictures, with values that were measured, that everything was done to exact what the OEM says it does. So it wasn't us, right, kind of thing. So we prepared ourselves from a litigation perspective. And of course, in that process, we created something that's very, that has a lot of the requirements, verification and, traceability of requirements. I say the OEM says this, I did this, right? And so it traces the requirements back to the OEM, and that's how we prepare ourselves for any kind of legal issues.
And when it comes to the actual computers, you guys are utilizing OEMs as well, correct?
So we have two calibration shops of our own, and that's more of a R&D to understand the market and of course test everything that we're doing, right? But yeah, all OEM tools, because we believe that's the correct way of doing things. Our equipment is scan tool agnostic, meaning the equipment is not necessarily connected to the tool, but in our documentation, we strongly suggest the OEM tools are used.
And that's one of the reasons why I think me and Brunno have good conversation, because we both feel at the end of the day that OEM tool is just as important as the rest of it, right? Make sure that nothing's reverse engineered, forced to go through. It needs to be natural, because if it shouldn't go through, it shouldn't go through.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the thing that when you have a non-OEM tool that is, let's say, 99% I don't know what the percentages are, but even if it's 99, that 1%, that could be something that you missed a calibration or you missed something super important that then causes an accident. And then look, I think calibration, ADAS calibration is unfortunately going to have a John Eagle event, right? To really people to take it so seriously as much as we do, as much as Spike and his team does, right? Because right now they're still kind of seen as an optional. I think it's getting better. I think anecdotally, as I talk to different shops and other companies, they're all taking it more serious, but you still see like, well, just ship it. There was no codes, right?
Yep.
And that's extremely dangerous in my mind, right? So,
Agreed.
Do you think that we're going to get to the point? It used to be that, and not so much anymore. At least I don't hear about it. I'm not from or been in any states that require EPA as far as sniffing the tailpipe and making sure the vehicle runs properly. You used to hear an awful lot about that. Do you think we'll get to the point where we'll have requirements to make sure that the vehicle's been calibrated properly when it's on the road by state by state?
Look, I think I'll give you my opinion. Okay, I think that's something that needs to happen, right? Because I think we did tests at the Transportation Research Center, and we used again, this is one data point, so I don't want to overgeneralize everything, but we did find that a 2024 vehicle with only 13,000 miles already had enough drift in performance of its ADAS system that it sparked the idea of like, whoa, maybe we should be looking into ADAS as a maintenance item, right? Because there's studies from TUV in Europe that shows that bracket materials, they sag, and the wear and tear of the vehicle, big bumps, right? These are things that will knock sensors out of whack, right? Yeah. And that, if you're not checking it, people might be relying on something that then is not going to activate, right? And it's super dangerous in my opinion. So I don't think we have the data in front of us to truly say that that's needed. But the little data that we do have, it's something that I think it warrants a better look at it. And look, I'm in a couple of the work groups with MEMA and SEMA, and that's one of the things that we're looking at is to try to get a sample size of vehicles and then understand what the state of health of ADAS on the roads are today. And I think use that data then to go to Uncle Sam and say, you really should study this and do this, from the industry first, but then say, look, we did a smaller sample, but I think it warrants a bigger, look at this. And then if it yields the results that I think it would, which is, we need to take a better look at this, then I think to your question, Jerry, you would probably go into every 1 year or every 3 years. I don't know what the data will say, but then to go in and make sure that your ADAS is working.
And it really makes sense to do that when you have more self-driving opportunities, right? You need to have some way to validate every so often that your stuff is still within spec and, not going to kill Timmy on his big wheel.
What's interesting on that, when I take a look over the years, when it comes to maintenance on vehicles from the factory as far as the requirements or what they recommend, what I find interesting is that the maintenance requirements are going down. You have a hard time even finding a vehicle anymore where the maintenance manual will tell you that you need a front end alignment. Those things have kind of disappeared because the big push was to make the vehicle so you literally only had to change oil, 10,000 miles now, let alone try to do anything else other than an air filter. And, we've really taken the customer's mind from maintaining a vehicle because you don't have to hardly do it anymore. In reality, we all know from the repair side of it that that's a farce. These vehicles need maintenance and they need to be taken a look at. So it'll be interesting to see how the manufacturers, and maybe it won't be the manufacturers, maybe it'll be states that decide that we need to have safer vehicles on the road and taking a look at it. But that's all we need is more laws, I guess, right?
Right.
It depends who you ask, right?
Yeah.
I think, is there a world where the algorithms of ADAS are good enough that it can self-calibrate for the most part? Yeah, I think so. I worked on some of those algorithms and for vision-only systems that are not using it to make any decisions on the kinematics of the vehicle, right? Yeah, you can do that. I think that we're not there today. So I think that's why it warrants this kind of study. But yeah, I think in the future, software will advance enough that they can do that. Not the case after a collision. I think always after a collision, you're going to need to recalibrate no matter what, because it just knocks everything out of whack, out of home. And then even the smartest of algorithms won't be able to detect it because it doesn't know, right? So I think calibration post-collision is something that's going to be there for a very long time until we eliminate collisions.
Yeah.
But I think this maintenance item one is more of a near to midterm. And then I think software hopefully catches up.
So Spike, I'm curious too. Obviously, you've looked at the equipment that they use. Where's your head being in the the aftermarket body shop world, so to speak, calibration end of it? Do you see yourself shifting equipment or thoughts after looking at what Bruno's company does, or how do you see that?
I like a system like that. There's also one other one on the market that I think is really cool too. I like Brunno's because they do have the end of the line relationships and understanding of how it works. And if I think there needs to be validation, right? There needs to be some sort of, hey, we need these values in a system like that. We'll store it. All those values give you a nice printout. I think the industry needs something like that. And we're good with anything. We just want the OEMs to tell us, yeah, you're good to use this. I know, Bruno, I think you guys were kind of late to the game to try to get some OEM approvals, but I do think they're going to get OEM approvals because their system's pretty cool.
We're getting our first one in the next couple of weeks. It is, again, I go back, I'm smiling because I go back to the comment of OEMs being siloed, right? We're doing, again, crazy number of vehicles for all of the OEMs at the end of line, but the manufacturing folks that we work with do not even know who the service people are. So then the service people are like, who are you? Right? And you're just another, it's like, no, we're in your end of lines. It does take time, and we are behind. I think, like Spike said, I think that, there's no doubt about it. But I think when you do a side-by-side comparison to the equipment, or our equipment versus a manual versus the other competitors, we've measured operational efficiency, so speed, and we're faster than all of them. And then when you compare, the precision and the accuracy, I will, stake my career here that, we are by far the most precise and accurate ones as well, because again, fully automated, we're not moving the rig around, right? So there's just more precision and accuracy to the work that we do. So even with all of that said, we still are chasing those approvals from the OEMs, even though the quality of the work is very high quality. So it's something that we have to do.
And I was impressed. We beta tested all these other machines out there, and when I went to theirs, they've just thought of a few things that nobody else has thought of. That in the back of my head, I'm like, this is kind of weird. And then when I saw their machine, I'm like, okay, you guys did think of this. And I'm like, well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
and that comes from doing all the stuff at the end of line, right? I mean, it's our engineers are very bright, and, they've been able they've been doing this for a very long time. And when we ported it over to the aftermarket, a lot of those lessons learned came with it.
So let's just say that I've been involved in an accident, and there's speculation that the ADAS system was the reason I was in an accident. So now I'm in a legal case, and I need to have an ADAS specialist, a professional. Am I going to be getting a hold of Bruno? Am I going to get a hold of Spike? Am I going to get a hold of let's say it's a Ford. Am I going to get a hold of somebody from Ford to be my expert witness? Who's an expert now?
I mean, look, if it all depends on how, I guess in this hypothetical, right? Like, let's say you got into this accident, it's the vehicle's first accident, right? And they say, oh, it was the ADAS. Then you're going to get OEM or tier 1 engineers to talk about it. If you have an accident that it was after your car has been in an accident and it was calibrated improper, let's say, but you don't know that yet, and then you have another accident and they say it's because of ADAS, then you're probably getting somebody like Spike or somebody in the collision industry that knows how to do things the right way to then examine how things were done previous to the accident that they thought was caused by the calibration. So it kind of depends, but I've seen lawsuits where, they always go after the OEM right? As far as if it's just the first time. And then the OEM will then try to pass the buck to the radar or the camera supplier. And why didn't you see that? Or so I've seen one for Ford that then went down to Bosch, right? So it really depends.
So
Sorry, that was a long answer.
who tells who what when it comes between your company and the manufacturer? Are you guys responding to what the manufacturer wants to create, or are you telling the manufacturer what you can do or what the system needs to do for them to incorporate into their vehicle?
It's a little bit of both, right? I think that we've created such a knowledge base of what to do and what not to do by working with different OEMs, right? With all of them, that sometimes you get an OEM that's kind of ahead of the curve and they come up with some new ideas or new ways of doing things or new things to test that you're then designing to their requirements. Other times we say, look, we have intellectual property of doing things a certain way that are cheaper or faster that we would like to implement, and they like it and we implement it, right? So it's a little bit of both, but it is, very dependent on what kind of vehicle, what kind of ADAS system is in the vehicle, right? As you know, these level 3 vehicles are starting to come out, that are going to have 6 to 7 cameras, 7 radars, 8 radars, right? That you can imagine that the end of line is going to look very different. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it because we're doing the end of line for them. And we're already thinking about ways of how we're going to address that in the aftermarket, because most of the systems today, they're forward facing only. And then you have to do some math and other things to find out where to put targets around the vehicle, right? So it's only going to get more complicated as those features penetrate more the car park.
So Bruno, you don't agree with the, I just spoke at a 20 group and I got told by a lady that businesses like mine would be gone in 5 years. And I said, I think we stand on opposite sides of that fence, ma'am.
No, I don't. I really don't think so. Not only because, of course, I have a vested interest in it, but in being full transparent, I think that the technology is still not there where it's going to completely avoid collisions. It's just not, right? I think even with FMVSS 127, they're supposed to be avoiding a lot more. OEMs are fighting really hard because it is a hard problem to solve. AVs, which are level 4s, right? Those are just starting, right? I mean, Waymo is the clear leader, and they are in presence in San Francisco and in other cities, but they're starting their rollouts, right? So it's not like it's going to really make a dent in the next 5. No, I would completely disagree with that, Spike, too, and it's just not realistic. The car park age is 12 and a half years, right? So for that to turn over, and even if you assume that all these new vehicles are way better at stopping it, right? Like, it's just, you're still going to have accidents to happen. So, I mean, look, the data says, for AAA study, the ADAS is working today very well at 0 to 35 miles an hour. Okay. Then you get into 35 and above, or 30, when it went to 45, 50% of the vehicles failed, where it was 100 had passed before. And then when it got above 45%, all of them failed, right? So that means that technology still got a ways to go. 2029 with FMVSS 127 has to have a leap in technology to really prevent it to up to 62 miles an hour. So yeah, I still think that there's still a lot of work to be done. Even when it's reduced to a certain level, I think the complexity of the repairs, because of what we talked earlier, where the vehicles are going to be so complicated, those repairs become more expensive and more profitable for shops and whatnot, more things to calibrate, right? So personally, my opinion, again, right, I don't think, that's an accurate statement that you were told, Spike.
Yep, that's what I thought.
I don't obviously know who this person was, and I don't know their background, but I'm guessing that person's simply scared of what's going on in the future, and or very naive would be my guess, but don't know.
Tesla owner.
Yeah, and I mean, look, there is I'll tell you, look, when I was at General Motors, we worked with Cruise Automation, which was the robotaxi company that GM had acquired. And this was in 2017 when I first started working with them. And they're like, 2019, we're launching full robotaxis, right? And then it was like 2020. And it just kept going. And then 10 years after, GM had to shut it down. And now you see Waymo starting to. So, I think there's this hype, right? There's always a hype, right? AI is a big hype right now, but AVs were a big hype back in 2017, 2016. And people thought, oh yeah, we are going to solve this problem, and it's such a hard problem to solve. I mean, the number of edge cases that you have are almost infinite, right? So for a computer system to truly be able to do that, it's going to take time. And I think the comments that maybe you heard, Spike, where you said Tesla owner, right? They believe the full self-driving is actually full self-driving, which is still a level 2 system legally.
Yep.
To a level 2. So are they going to figure out? I'm sure they will, right? But you're still going to have tons of. It's definitely not 5 years. I think it's going to be much longer than that. So again,
I need 7 to 9, somewhere around there.
It sounds like the retirement age.
True statement.
I don't know if I have any other questions. This has been very interesting. I could probably talk for hours or ask questions for a long time. But Brunno, do you have any questions for myself or Spike?
No. I mean, look, I appreciate you guys having me on. I think every time we get a chance to get in front of whatever audience, like Spike and I did at SEMA, right? I think it's important. I think our industry there is a big lack of education, right? Not like a proper education, but awareness, I should say.
Yeah.
There's a lack of awareness that people are just not aware. The customer is definitely not aware. There are shops that are not aware of the importance, right? So again, I'm thankful that you guys are doing this. We have our own it's an AI podcast. It started by, I want to consume information in a podcast style. And then people were like, hey, I want to listen to this. So I put it out there. It's called ADAS Garage. I put, research and other things. And then AI does a podcast with AI voices. So it just, again, educate people. So my thing is always like, every chance I get, I will do something like this. And again, thanks for having me and being able to talk to your.
We don't know what we don't know, do we?
Well, to me, I think the biggest one, Bruno, like you were saying, is customer education, right? Because when they start asking about it, that's when shops are going to start paying more attention, hopefully, because the number of shops that truly get this is pretty minuscule compared to what we need. So we've got to get it out there because this stuff does matter.
Every day when I go down the road, I just cringe because I drive in almost anywhere. I see a glass being replaced in the windshield in a parking lot someplace. I don't care where, every day. And depending on the vehicle, I'm just going, oh boy,
Yep.
Are we going to have the vehicle calibrated when they're done? Is it going to be right? Or are they just going to have a clean windshield?
Right.
So it can be a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
People just don't understand and know. They just they don't realize it.
We had a good customer that he had his windshield replaced somewhere else, and they replaced it 3 times before they put factory in because it wouldn't calibrate any of the times. So then he needed another windshield, and he's like, I don't want to go through that again. And I said, tell your insurance company you want OEM. Tell them what happened last time. Went through the first time, and he's like, I just can't believe that glass makes that much of a difference.
Oh, yeah.
And that is glass that's trying to be calibrated. There's a whole lot that don't even get an attempt, right? It just goes back out on the road.
Yeah.
So at least this customer knew there was something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, and I mean, look, it's only going to get more complicated where LiDAR is a new sensor that's coming into vehicles. Some vehicles are going to have them behind the windshield, and LiDAR is still an optical device, right? But calibrating those are not as easy as a camera, I'd say. So anyway, I like to scare people because I think it's fear that gets people to like, whoa, wait a minute, right? Versus, trying to be, super educational and nice, but like I try to scare people as much as I can because I'm like, guys, this is serious, right?
Yeah.
I always say drive safe to my wife, before she leaves, and we're working on things that actually will help others drive safe because you never know, right? What's going to happen and, take care of all of those things. So I think it's a noble cause for us to go after and make sure that these things are doing what they're supposed to be doing that can prevent lives, fatalities, right? So I think it's awesome that the work that I get to do kind of aligns with like a life goal, right? So it's just, again, and the opportunity to come here and talk about it, even better. So thanks.
Well, and my wife appreciates any piece of technology on a car because, she knows she's not the best driver. She's busy doing whatever. So we'll take all the help you can give us, Bruno.
Absolutely, man.
Well,
I think
like
good
a lot
for
of people, all that's important is that they've got to have room for their suction cup for the phone, got to have the toll pass suction onto the windshield, and then I got to have room for my radar detector. And I should remove the rear view mirror so it's easier to see, but I don't.
Right.
Yeah, so by the time you get done, safety becomes a topic. Well, again, I appreciate the time that everybody took. Hopefully that we got some answers to questions that people or viewers have. So again, thank you for both of your time, and very much appreciated. This was fun and very, very interesting to me. So thank you.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.